It was a quiet afternoon at the market, the kind of day that feels almost frozen in time. Sunlight danced gently across the cobblestone streets, warming the faces of families strolling through the bustling lanes. Children ran between stalls, their laughter echoing like music in the air, mingling perfectly with the soft strumming of a street musician playing a mellow tune on his guitar. The scent of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and fragrant flowers filled every corner. Everyone seemed happy, relaxed, and completely unaware of what was about to happen. Vendors were calling out their offers with cheerful voices, couples were wandering hand in hand, and a few tourists were stopping to take photos, trying to capture the perfect memory of this peaceful day. You could almost hear the calm hum of life itself, gentle, predictable, and safe. Among the crowd walked an older man. His hair was slightly graying, his steps slow but deliberate. He moved with a quiet confidence, like someone who had seen the world, survived its chaos, and learned a thing or two along the way. There was nothing flashy about him, no designer clothes, no loud gadgets, just a calm presence that somehow stood out in the serene chaos of the market. And yet, if someone had looked closely, they might have noticed the slight tension in the air around him. The birds seemed to pause mid-flight as if sensing a change. A couple of vendors glanced nervously at a distant corner, shrugging as if unsure why they felt uneasy. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the feeling was there, a quiet warning that this peaceful moment, so ordinary and safe, was about to shatter. The older man continued walking, unaware of the small but significant ripple his presence was about to send through the crowd. People smiled at him politely, none knowing that his calm demeanor hid a strength and skill that very few could imagine. And far beyond the market, the shadows of trouble were beginning to stir, because one man was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and it would change this quiet afternoon forever. The calm of the market had barely settled when the first crack of tension appeared. Among the stalls of fresh fruits and handmade crafts, a group of bikers roared into the area, their engines growling like wild beasts. Leather jackets creaked, chrome gleamed under the afternoon sun, and their presence alone made heads turn. People instinctively stepped aside, unsure whether to smile, stay calm, or get out of the way. At the center of this chaos walked the older man. He moved slowly, deliberately, weaving through the crowd without raising an alarm. His eyes scanned the surroundings not out of fear, but with an awareness that only comes from experience. He was calm, almost eerily so, in a space where chaos was beginning to hum beneath the surface. It happened in an instant. A tall, burly biker, clearly used to intimidation, barreled through the crowd without caution. His elbow bumped sharply into the older man's shoulder, and he sneered down at him, his voice cutting like a whip. "Watch where you're going, old man." There was a pause, a tiny, almost imperceptible moment where time seemed to stretch. The older man didn't flinch. He straightened his posture, smiled faintly, and said in a calm, even voice, "Sorry about that. No harm done." The biker's sneer widened, disbelief flashing in his eyes. He wasn't used to apologies. He wasn't used to calm. He was used to fear, and he wasn't going to get it here. "No harm done." The biker spat, stepping closer, his shadow stretching over the older man. "Do you know who you're messing with?" The older man looked up, eyes steady, unwavering, as if meeting the question without even acknowledging it. The crowd around them started to notice. Some whispered nervously to their friends. Phones began to appear from pockets. Cameras pointed toward the unfolding scene. There was something magnetic about the calm in the face of aggression, an almost unnatural peace that drew attention. The biker, growing impatient and frustrated, started gesturing wildly, trying to assert dominance. He pushed forward, trying to intimidate. Yet the older man didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a move. The tension in the air grew, thick enough that you could almost touch it. Every person in the market seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. Other bikers began to notice the unusual resistance of this single man. A few smirked, confident that they would teach him a lesson with just a glare or a shove. But the older man remained a pillar of calm. He spoke again, gently, almost as if trying to reason with a child. "I don't want trouble. Walk away, it's not worth it." The biker laughed, loud and brash, completely dismissing the warning. "You think you can tell me what to do, old man? You're in my way now." People instinctively moved back, sensing that this confrontation could escalate at any second. The air felt electric. The sound of the street musician, the chatter of families, the laughter of children, all seemed to fade into the background. Only the sound of the biker's voice, booming and aggressive, and the calm, measured tones of the older man remained. It was a clash of two worlds, raw aggression versus quiet mastery, and the crowd could feel it. Phones continued to rise, capturing every detail. Eyes widened in disbelief as the tension grew, knowing that the next moment could explode into chaos. The older man didn't back down. His calm wasn't weakness. It was a warning. And though no one could see it yet, every subtle gesture, every small breath, hinted that he was ready for what was coming, but only on his own terms. Before we continue, tell me, have you ever seen someone stay completely calm under pressure? And tag a friend who needs to learn the power of keeping their cool in a chaotic moment. The biker's sneer widened, and the older man's calmness seemed to fuel his anger. What was meant to intimidate had only drawn attention. The crowd began to notice the tension rising, glancing from the biker to the man with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Phones emerged from pockets as everyone instinctively documented what was unfolding, sensing a story that would be shared endlessly. "You think you're some kind of hero?" The biker shouted, stepping closer, chest puffed out, fingers twitching as if ready to strike. His voice cut sharply through the market's gentle ambience. "Who do you think you are?" The older man didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood, his eyes calm and unwavering, his body relaxed yet fully aware of the threat. Every movement he made, the tilt of his head, the positioning of his hands, suggested complete control. The air around him seemed charged almost like the calm before a storm. The biker's frustration grew with each passing second. He gestured wildly, pointing at the man as if to brand him a coward. "You're nothing but an old man hiding behind calm words," he barked. But the older man remained steady. In fact, the calmer he stayed, the more the crowd noticed. People whispered to each other, phones capturing every subtle expression. There was something magnetic about this composure, something different. Something the biker couldn't understand and couldn't control. The older man spoke softly, almost too quietly to be heard over the rising tension. "It doesn't have to end this way. Walk away and no one gets hurt." The biker laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed across the market. "Hurt you? Who do you think you are? You don't scare me." As his words grew louder, the crowd leaned in, sensing that this confrontation was no ordinary argument. Shoppers stopped mid-step, children paused in play, vendors froze mid-call. There was a collective intake of breath, an unspoken agreement that everyone was witnessing something extraordinary. The older man didn't react to the insults, the shoves, or the mockery. His calm was unshakable. And that was what infuriated the biker most, the idea that someone could remain composed, even in the face of outright disrespect. "You think being quiet makes you strong?" The biker sneered, now towering over him. "You're weak. You're pathetic." The older man tilted his head slightly, letting the words hang in the air unchallenged. And in that moment, the entire market seemed to lean closer. Phones were raised, capturing reactions. Eyes widened. People started murmuring to each other, whispers like ripples in water. "Who is he? Why is he so calm? Something about him, it's different." The tension was rising to a breaking point. Every verbal jab, every shove, every aggressive gesture from the biker only highlighted the older man's composure. It was a silent power, one that the biker could neither name nor understand. And that, more than anything, made him reckless. Then, in a final act of audacity, the biker stepped in closer, face inches from the older man, and raised his voice, demanding a reaction. The crowd collectively held its breath. Some leaned forward, some whispered frantic warnings. All eyes were locked on the standoff, a dangerous balance of aggression versus calm mastery. The older man didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited. And in that stillness, the entire market felt it, the calm before the storm, the moment just before the inevitable. The biker had crossed a line, and he didn't even realize it yet. Then the biker crossed a line he could never uncross. The market was electric with anticipation. Every whisper, every shuffle, every sideways glance told the same story. Something monumental was about to happen. The biker had pushed too far. He had tested the older man's patience in ways no one should dare. And yet, the older man remained calm, like the eye of a hurricane surrounded by swirling chaos. Suddenly, with no warning, the biker's hand shot forward. The slap was loud, sharp, and unmistakable. It cracked through the air like a gunshot, silencing the chatter, the laughter, the very heartbeat of the market. Time seemed to stretch. Children froze mid-step. Vendors paused mid-call. Even the birds above stopped their flight for a heartbeat. The world held its breath. The older man's cheek jerked slightly from the force, but he did not flinch otherwise. He did not raise his hands in defense. He did not react in anger or fear. The crowd gasped collectively, a sound like a wave rolling through the market. Everyone froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding as they realized something extraordinary was happening here. The biker smirked, expecting a reaction, a flinch, a yell, anything that would validate his aggression. But there was nothing. Silence, complete, unwavering, unnerving silence. The older man's eyes met the biker's, calm and piercing, like a quiet warning that carried far more weight than words ever could. People around began to whisper. Did he just get slapped and didn't move? Who is this man? This isn't normal. The biker, emboldened by his audacity, took a step closer, glaring down at the older man. You think you can just stand there?
Just take it.
He shouted, voice trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief. The older man's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but the faintest acknowledgement of what was coming. He spoke softly, almost more to himself than to the biker. You're about to learn something you won't forget. The crowd felt it too. Every phone, every pair of eyes, every onlooker recognized the shift in energy. The calm wasn't fear. The calm was confidence, power, and mastery. It was a warning that could not be ignored. The biker laughed, nervous now, shaking slightly. He had expected resistance, yes, but not this. Not this unwavering, unshakable composure that seemed to fill the air like a tangible force. The market remained silent, suspended in that tense moment. The older man's presence seemed to slow down time, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next move, the one move that would change everything. And then, the subtle signs began. A shift in stance, a tightening of muscles, a calm intensity in his gaze. The older man wasn't reacting, he was preparing for a response so precise, so controlled, that the biker wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The biker, meanwhile, was unaware of the invisible line he had crossed. His aggression, his arrogance, his underestimation of the older man had led him here, to the point of no return. One more step, one more shout, one more move, and the calm before the storm would break. And in that instant, the market realized the truth. This confrontation was no longer about a simple shove or insult. It was a lesson in underestimating someone whose calm hides unmatched skill. A lesson in respect, patience, and consequences. But the man didn't react the way anyone expected. The market was silent, frozen in the aftermath of the slap. The biker's face twisted in anger, frustration, and confusion. He had expected a reaction, a fight, a shout, anything. But the older man remained perfectly still. Calm, composed, unmoving. It was as if he were a statue carved from patience itself, and the chaos around him only emphasized the quiet power he radiated. The biker's frustration grew. His shoves and insults had failed. The crowd, sensing something unusual, began to murmur. Phones were raised higher, eyes widened, people leaned forward, straining to catch every subtle movement, every expression, every hint of what might come next. There was an almost electric tension in the air, the kind that makes your heart race and your stomach tighten at the same time. Then, almost imperceptibly, the older man shifted his stance. Not aggressively, not defensively, just slightly. A subtle change that spoke volumes to anyone who knew how to read it. His calm gaze never left the biker, but the air around him seemed to thicken, charged with quiet authority. He spoke, softly, deliberately, each word carrying weight beyond measure. I tried to stop you, not for me, but for you. The biker's laugh came out nervous this time, forced, unsure. For me, what do you mean? His voice wavered. He was beginning to sense that this situation was no longer under his control, that he had miscalculated entirely. The older man's eyes flicked briefly to the crowd. Phones captured the glances, people felt the pause in the world, a subtle warning that something bigger was about to unfold. And then he spoke again, just as softly. You don't know who's coming. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Some looked around nervously. Others whispered to friends and strangers alike. Who's coming? Is he serious? The biker, still trying to assert dominance, scoffed. Coming. No one's coming for me. I'm the one in control here. But even he couldn't hide the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Something about the older man's calmness, the unshakable composure, made him question everything he thought he knew. The older man took a slow step forward, measured, deliberate. The kind of step that implies you are ready for anything, and nothing is beyond your capability. You think this is just about you and me, he said, eyes piercing, but it's never just been about that. The crowd was leaning in now. Every shopper, vendor, and passerby was on edge, phones recording, hearts racing. The market had transformed from a peaceful afternoon into a stage of suspense. You could feel the tension, the weight of a coming storm, pressing down on everyone like an invisible hand. Every subtle movement of the older man, every calm breath, every tiny shift in his posture hinted that something larger was about to happen. He wasn't alone. And that was the terrifying part, not for him, but for the biker. He couldn't see what was coming, couldn't anticipate the consequences. He was blind to the storm that had already begun to form around him. The older man's final words before the reveal carried a quiet menace, an almost imperceptible promise. Because the real danger isn't standing in front of you. The biker laughed again, but it was hollow, nervous. The crowd leaned in, caught between disbelief and fear. Everyone sensed the tension, the suspense, the delayed reckoning that was only moments away. Phones shook slightly as hands filmed the scene. Hearts raced, eyes widened. Something monumental was about to change. Have you ever faced someone completely calm when you expected chaos? Tag a friend who needs to see the power of patience and composure in the face of disrespect. The tension in the market was unbearable. Every person, from the vendors behind their stalls to the tourists taking pictures, felt it. The biker's bravado was beginning to crack, his confidence slipping with each silent, piercing glance from the older man. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment that would change everything. Then, suddenly it happened. The distant rumble of engines broke through the silence. Heads turned, phones instinctively raised, capturing the unmistakable sound of black SUVs approaching. The roar of the engines cut through the market like thunder, and the biker's smirk faltered for the first time. Something was coming, something bigger, something he could not anticipate. The SUVs screeched to a stop at the edge of the market. Black, glossy, and intimidating, they looked like they belonged in a movie rather than a peaceful public square. Federal agents in dark suits poured out, moving with precision, surrounding the area as if it were a high-security operation. Their presence transformed the market from a quiet afternoon into a scene of authority and urgency. The biker's eyes widened. He turned from side to side, realizing the scale of what he had provoked. The crowd gasped collectively, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Who are they? What's happening? This can't be real. The energy of anticipation turned into a collective shock. Then, from the line of agents, one man stepped forward. Tall, confident, and commanding, he moved toward the older man with purpose. There was a familiarity in his gaze, a warmth that contrasted with the tension surrounding them. The crowd leaned in, some craning their necks as the moment drew to a dramatic peak. And then it hit everyone at once, the truth. The older man was not just an ordinary figure. The agents parted to reveal his identity in the most dramatic fashion. The man who had stood silently, calmly, under the biker's aggression, was the father of the Chief of Homeland Security. The older man looked at the approaching figure, eyes softening for the first time. The Chief of Homeland Security knelt slightly, concern etched across his face, and spoke in a voice that carried both relief and authority. "Dad, are you okay?" The crowd fell silent. Phones were still raised, capturing every second as the realization settled in. The biker's face turned from confusion to terror. He had slapped someone he thought was an ordinary man. Someone calm, unassuming, seemingly harmless, only to discover the magnitude of his mistake. The agents immediately secured the area, guiding the biker away and containing the situation before it could escalate further. The older man stood silently, composed, yet the quiet in his gaze now held a subtle pride. He had demonstrated patience, restraint, and mastery, and it had protected not just himself, but his family, and commanded respect from everyone who had witnessed the moment. The crowd began to murmur excitedly, some still in disbelief.
"That was incredible. I can't believe he stayed calm. Who even is he?"
Everyone's attention was riveted on the older man, whose composed demeanor had turned a dangerous confrontation into a powerful life lesson. The biker, now realizing the gravity of his actions, could only stare, frozen in fear and regret. He had underestimated not just the man, but the consequences of disrespect. And as the older man walked away, supported by his son and surrounded by the agents, the crowd understood the calm, composed figure they had witnessed was a force far greater than aggression, far greater than arrogance. And that's when the biker realized who he had slapped. The market had returned to a state of uneasy calm, though nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Vendors cautiously resumed their calls, children slowly began to play, and people whispered in awe about what had just unfolded. Phones still held recordings of the confrontation, the slap, and the dramatic reveal. Every onlooker was replaying the moment in their minds, feeling the tension, the shock, and ultimately, the lesson that had been delivered without a single shout or violent outburst. The older man stood at the edge of the market, flanked by his son and the agents who had ensured safety. For the first time in the confrontation, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Not because of the drama that had unfolded, but because of the lesson he had shown to everyone present. Truth is measured not by the force of your aggression, but by the calm mastery of yourself in the face of it. The crowd slowly gathered around, drawn to him like moths to a quiet, steady flame. Many whispered words of admiration. Some dared to ask for advice on how they, too, could remain composed under pressure. But the older man didn't speak in grand statements. His wisdom wasn't in flashy words or dramatic gestures. It was in simple truth conveyed calmly, sincerely, and with unwavering conviction. Respect, he began, his voice soft but carrying clearly over the murmurs of the crowd, should never depend on who someone is, how strong they appear, or how loud they shout. It should be given because they are human. He let the words linger, allowing the weight of the lesson to settle into every mind watching him. The market had witnessed chaos, arrogance, aggression, and it had also witnessed restraint, composure, and quiet power. The two were not always obvious, but when combined, they created something unforgettable. The biker, now subdued and escorted by agents, could only glance back with a mixture of regret and disbelief. He had sought to intimidate, to assert dominance, to provoke fear, and instead, he had been confronted by patience, wisdom, and consequences far beyond his understanding. The lesson was clear. Disrespect carries a cost, and calm, measured strength is far more powerful than raw aggression. The older man turned to his son, a quiet pride in his eyes. No words were needed between them. The message had been delivered to the world: strength isn't in fighting first, but in knowing when and how to act. He had protected himself, his family, and even the lessons of life, without succumbing to anger. The crowd slowly dispersed, many still whispering, some replaying the videos on their phones. But the lesson lingered. In a world that often rewards loudness, aggression, and haste, there is immense power in calmness, patience, and respect. The market had been a stage, and the older man had been a teacher without even trying. He walked away with his son, the agents following, leaving behind a silent market filled with people whose minds and hearts had been changed forever. This wasn't just a story of confrontation. It was a story of composure, of human decency, of the invisible power that lies in self-control. Have you ever witnessed calmness that commanded respect? Tag someone who needs to learn the true power of patience and composure.